The future of the Toronto Maple Leafs is looking grim. The team had already ran out Mitch Marner out of town, and it looks like Austin Matthews could be on his way out next. But instead of focusing on Papi himself, I wanted to go from one Matthews to another and talk instead about Matthew Knies. Because, courtesy of Elliotte Friedman, we have a whole bunch of information as to what the future could hold for Knies himself, which teams could be interested, which teams have already checked in. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're diving into the uncertain and varied future of Matthew Knies and the Maple Leafs. But before we dive into that, I just wanted to get into the profile here. Let's talk about the player at hand, dive into his story, and then we'll get into the scoop. Matthew Knies is 23 years old, 6'3", 231, a left-handed winger, signed on to the end of 2032, making $7.75 million a year. Hey, look at the Toronto Maple Leafs. They signed a 6-year deal for a guy coming off of his ELC. Maybe they should have been doing that earlier in the decade, but I digress. Matthew Knies is on this $7.75 million deal because last season he had 58 points in 78 games. Not bad for a guy who was a second-round pick back in 2021, and definitely not bad for a guy who was able to demonstrate tremendous value immediately in the NCAA scene. Knies this season is at 57 points in 67 games, 18 goals and 39 assists, on pace for about 67 points in 79 total games played. Yes, there may have been a dip in goals from last year to this year, but the assists have gone up tremendously. I think nobody is going to complain about the projection and the offensive production of Matthew Knies. But with that said, Knies is 23 years old, and if you wanted to debate that there is a conversation to have about whether or not he stays in Toronto long-term, I think that's fair. And who also thinks it's fair is none other than Elliotte Friedman, who wrote on 32 Thoughts earlier on Thursday about player safety being a hot topic at the GM meetings. This will be linked in the description if you want to go out there and read its 32 Thoughts from earlier last week. Let's go out there and find the Matthew Knies conversation, scrolling past all this stuff about player safety and Radko Gudas and Austin Matthews. Let's just do a Command F and then we'll look for Knies. Take a look at this. Teams that showed serious interest in Matthew Knies on the trade front included the Anaheim Ducks, the Chicago Blackhawks, the Montreal Canadiens, New Jersey Devils, and the Utah Hockey Club. Everyone has denied that the Canadiens went far down the road, but we'll see. There were some teams who didn't believe the Maple Leafs were serious about trading away Knies, but they now recognize the possibility. If you scroll up, you can see a little bit of a conversation on these other names here. Sergei Bobrovsky, Mason McTavish, Vincent Trocheck. But Matthew Knies seems to have been the surprising one here. A young, fresh winger in the National Hockey League whose availability has been all but a myth up until now. The article actually continues talking about Knies here. The Montreal Canadiens have done a nice job of shielding their true intentions. There were rumors of a defenseman, of Knies, and even something else they might wish to revisit. They've definitely explored moving money too. There is a video to make about Patrik Laine in Philadelphia or Toronto, but that is technically not this video. Let's dive into each of these teams and what Matthew Knies could be for all of them, starting out with the Anaheim Ducks. Now, when I take a look at the Ducks, the same conclusions come to my mind almost every single time. This is a team that has a very specific identity in mind. The Ducks and Pat Verbeek like guys who play big, who play hard. The Leo Carlsons, the Beckett Senecas, the Cutter Gauthiers, the Mason McTavishes, and the Ryan Palings. Hell, one of their most important players is Radko Gudas, who is technically day-to-day or injured or suspended or whatever. Yeah, he took out Austin Matthews. He's one of their more valuable guys. Not to mention Jacob Trouba, also on that back end. Anaheim just has a thing for guys that are hard to play against and that are kind of immovable. Matthew Knies is a player who has that bite in him. I think he would fit very well with the Anaheim Ducks. The vision that Verbeek has for this team, I'd say that Knies and his winger qualities would provide some pretty good stability. Alex Killorn is not getting any younger. Jeffrey VL is definitely not a guy that I think most people would see as somebody who should be playing over Mikael Granlund. But then again, the Ducks have had some pretty interesting combinations of lines the past few months. Talking about some of these other teams, the Chicago Blackhawks. Could you imagine Matthew Knies playing alongside of Connor Bedard? Look at who he has right now. Ryan Green and Andre Burakovsky. Now, Burakovsky, I'd say, it wasn't since his Erie Otter days that I think anybody thought he was a legitimate offensive threat. And Ryan Green, I don't even know who that is. But having Connor Bedard alongside of a guy like Matthew Knies would definitely provide some nice puck-freeing, body-checking elements to that line. In fact, Frank Nazar is a guy who I think plays a pretty similar style to Matthew Knies. Having them two on a line together with Tyler Bertuzzi, for example, would be such a nightmare for all opponents, no matter what. Mikheyev, Lafferty, these guys play with pace as well. Former Vancouver Canucks, I know that, but still, Chicago finds a way to make it work. And I'm not saying necessarily make it work on a wins and losses front. Chicago still is one of the worst teams in the National Hockey League. But they're pretty optimistic about their future. And trading away whatever veterans or money or picks or whatever they could have for a guy like Knies certainly would be something of intrigue. Talking about the Montreal Canadiens, well, this is obviously a conversation we have had in the past. The Habs have quite a number of guys that are already fighting for spots. You have players that can score, like Alexandre Texier getting taken out of the lineup, not because he's bad, but because there are just too many guys that need to get playing time. Brendan Gallagher got healthy scratched the other night. Now you take a look at some of the injuries over here. Josh Anderson is out. Kirby Dach is out. Patrick Laine, of course, on the IR. Say what you want about the idea of a Laine trade for Knies, but Matthew Knies as a bona fide top six piece would be a really good addition to either a Suzuki or a Kapanen line. Heck, move Slavkovsky over down to line 2 again, because that Slav, Kapanen, Demidov line was so amazing. And then have Knies on the first line with Suzuki and Caulfield. That would be tremendous. Knies plays a pretty similar style, I would say, to Uri Slavkovsky, except with a little more physicality and maybe more bite. Slav has more pure offensive skill, but still, these guys can play a similar rover-type role on a primarily offensive line with Suzuki and Caulfield. I like the idea of Montreal a lot. New Jersey's a pretty intriguing team, especially when you talk about the players that they're supposed to be leading the charge over there. Hischier, Hughes, Brott, Meyer. I'd say there's a bit of disappointment for a lot of the guys in Jersey this season. Matthew Knies going over would be a pretty interesting bet. Now, funny note, we did actually talk about the idea of Knies and New Jersey earlier on in the week, because we had spoken about the redraft. 2021 redraft, Matthew Knies was initially taken in the second round. The Elite Prospects redraft had him going, 4th overall to New Jersey instead of Luke Hughes? That would have been a pretty big swing if it went down that way. Obviously, it wouldn't have. And then you talk about the last team here, the Utah Hockey Club, the Utah Mammoth. Man, oh man, this team does not need Matthew Knies. They are already pretty loaded up front. They've got their skill guys, they've got their scorers, Cooley, Genther, Peterka, Keller. They have their centers locked down, Nick Schmaltz, and then they have their physical dudes, Jack McBain, Michael Carcone, even Kaylor Yamamoto, that guy's on the 4th line. Knies would make this team a lot better, but still, I think they're already pretty good without him. Young team, exciting team, fast team. There's a lot to like out of Utah, and because they're so eager to keep on improving their team, I respect them for going after Knies, although I would have been scared for my life if they were able to make it happen. With that said, though, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about each of these teams and Elliotte Friedman's revealed trade interest that they have in Knies. The Canadiens, the Blackhawks, the Mammoth, the Ducks, the Devils. Let me know in the comment section all your opinions about these teams and whether or not you think a trade for Knies would work out. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.